everyone, Jennifer here. I'm just popping into the very beginning again to ask you to please rate and review this show on any podcast platform that allows it, especially Apple Podcasts, because that really helps the show find new listeners. Okay, here we go.
But we went and we had like a great time. Our table wasn't really near anyone, so none of us really thought anything of it. And we spent the day at his house all together, playing games. It was a great day. And when we left on the night of the 19th, gave him a big hug, thought I'd be seeing him on the 24th. Didn't think anything of it. And then on the 23rd, my dad and my stepmom told us, we're not feeling well. We both have a fever, body aches, it could be COVID.
There was the last normal day, the last day that things were the way they were before they weren't anymore.
We kind of all rushed out of the house and said a quick goodbye. And, little did I know that would be the last time I hugged my mom.
He yells and tells me he's getting ready to go. He said, I'm okay. Just stay here. I'll be home in a few hours. We tell him bye and he leaves. That was the last time we ever saw him.
It's like the minute that helicopter hit the air, it just hit me what I was watching, because I knew he wasn't coming home and he knew he wasn't coming home.
For me, I took it more personally because I'm a nurse practitioner and why can't I save him? I can help all these other people, and why can't I save him?
They're telling us that it was time, we needed to make a decision, we need to go ahead and just take him off the ventilator. And I was like, how do we know?
One thing I like to tell people is that if you lose somebody to COVID, your need to talk about the person you lost will outlast other people's desire to hear about it.
We make sure that our family members and loved ones' memories lived on. That's really important to me, is that people don't forget. I don't want to forget any of it.
So talk about them. Talk about them till people are sick of hearing about them. Because as long as you're still talking about them, they're never far away.
And the last thing that my mom said is, she said, when you get to heaven, we will look for each other.
Hello everyone, you're listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host, Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com, or go to the website forthosewelostpodcast.com and click on the contact button and you can reach me that way as well. Also, if you'd like to help support the show, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is also in the show notes. All right, let's get started with this episode. Today, I'll be talking to Lauren in New York. Lauren lost her dad, Anthony Granchelli, to COVID on January 19th, 2022. Lauren was on almost every call from the hospital while her dad was there and requested his medical records, which she had with her during this recording. In this episode, she goes through the day-to-day of her dad's hospitalization. She also talks about her grief and how she is experiencing her COVID loss in 2022 versus how many people describe feeling early in the pandemic. For context, we recorded this episode on October 19th, 2022. This is the last of last year's episodes. I have finally caught up on all the shows I recorded in 2022. Finally, at about minute 60 of this episode, we do talk in detail about end of life and the effects of long-term hospitalization. This could be triggering for some. And with that, I'd like to welcome Lauren to the show today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, today we are talking about your dad.
Yep.
And he passed away on January 19th, 2022.
Correct.
Okay. And you live in New York and he lived in Connecticut.
Yeah, that's correct. He grew up in the Bronx and later on moved to Connecticut when he was about 30.
Okay. Where I like to start each episode, and even though your father passed away in early 2022, I still kind of want to go back to March 2020 and just talk about how you first heard about COVID, how you and your family talked about it, the changes you made, your dad and the changes he made and what happened.
Yes. So I had always lived in New York. My siblings were in New York, Connecticut. And in November 2019, I actually moved to Chicago with my boyfriend. So I was actually home visiting the first week of March. And in the news, there was a lot of talk of COVID, now getting introduced in New York City. So I saw my family that week. We had actually gone to the movies because we were a bit afraid of it, but also didn't fully know. This is before everything shut down, kind of what it entailed. So spent time with my family that week, and everyone was a little bit uneasy about it, but didn't think too much of it. So I returned to Chicago, and the following week was when everything really shut down, New York, Connecticut, and Chicago. So I started working from home. We all kind of thought at the time it was going to be a temporary 2-week thing. And my dad, he actually manages a car dealership in Connecticut. So there was no working from home. He had been in the car business his entire career, about 40 years, really loved what he did and was really good at it. So when COVID hit, his immediate worry was, okay, now the dealership's closing, what are we going to do for now? So him and my stepmom, his wife, were home for the first 2 weeks, just not working. And then I would say, and everyone was fully quarantining, not leaving the house. I think fear kind of came in that, okay, this is serious. There's more to worry about than just work. So they really didn't see anyone. March, April. And then I would say at the end of April, my dad and my stepmom started going into work without customers being there, but just getting some of the paperwork done. And I remember my brother and I just being concerned and really stressing to my dad, you really have to be careful. That was the time where no one was leaving the house besides the grocery store. So about 4 weeks in with him going into the office, even if no one was there, we were just concerned. So I would say that's how it began. And we had I would say honest conversations as a family, this is serious. We need to take this seriously. We don't want anyone getting sick. And I think my dad fully understood that. So summer of 2020, they started, I believe they reopened probably in June or July, but they just had appointments only. So you had to have an appointment to come in. You had to be masked up. So he started seeing more people in the general public, which made us concerned, but it was part of his job. So as long as he was being safe, we were trying to be comfortable with it.
Yeah, that was when you first mentioned about the dealership. I guess in my mind, I just don't think car buying is an essential service.
Right.
Yeah, but I get it. Did you see your dad and your mom at all in the 18 months or so in between like June of 2020 and before he got COVID?
Yes. So actually, I had flown home in June of 2020, super nervous. Like my boyfriend and I wore face shields, masks. My brother was graduating from college, so we wanted to go home from the weekend and for the weekend. And I hadn't seen my dad since March. So I spent the weekend at his house. Um, we really just tried to keep it like us. And I was definitely concerned flying there, but we had wanted to see them. So saw them for a weekend in June. And then actually in August of 2020, my boyfriend and I moved back to New York. Just being in a new city with the pandemic didn't really make sense. And we wanted to be closer to family. So once we moved back in August of 2020, I probably saw my dad once a month. Either if it was for dinner, we were doing something with the family. We always kind of made sure to do at least, one thing a month. So between August 2020 and when he got sick in December, saw him quite a bit, which I'm very thankful for. I always think back, like if we didn't move back from Chicago, I wouldn't have had all of that time with him that I was lucky to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm one of those people that has never been to that part of the East Coast. I mean, I was born in New Hampshire, but I don't remember any of it at all. What was the travel distance between where you were in New York and your dad in Connecticut? I know it's a tightly knit area of smaller-ish states, but how long did it take, and did you drive or take a train, or how did you get there?
Yeah, so from New York City to his house was about an hour and a half. But he worked in Greenwich, which is about 45 minutes outside the city. So if we were going to his house, I would either take the train to Connecticut and then either drive with one of my siblings, or if we met for dinner, I would take the train to Greenwich. Always wearing a mask, but at that point, it was like, we want to see family. Let's figure out what we can do to make that happen.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that very well. I went to see my dad. He lived in Boise. He's moved to Oklahoma now, but I drove back and forth quite a few times because once my mom passed away, I just needed that connection.
Right.
And it was one of those things where I was like, okay, this is a risk, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we move forward to December of 2021 and talk about what happened with your dad. If you know how he got COVID, how you found out, and what happened with him.
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of back history. Just on April of 2021, he was eligible for the vaccine in Connecticut. I believe it was really end of March, but he wanted to check with his doctor because in 2019 he had a spontaneous brain bleed where he was in the hospital for 2 weeks out of nowhere, was completely healthy prior, and had all of this brain and fluid collecting on his blood and fluid collecting on his brain. So when the vaccine came out, he was very adamant about getting it, but spent like 2 weeks talking to his doctor and his previous neurosurgeon to make sure it was safe for him. So once he got their approval, he got, I believe, Pfizer. So he had 2 doses of the shot in April of 2021. And honestly, I felt like I could breathe a little bit better once my parents were vaccinated, my grandparents, myself, like my whole family. It kind of felt like, oh, thank God. Now everyone should be okay. So my dad was like a big believer in the vaccine and medicine. So when he got the shot, I was very grateful. So then fast forward to December 2021, I got the booster. I had spoken to my dad about it. They were planning to get it right after Christmas. He's like, okay, let's just get through the holidays. Then I'll get the booster. He had gone to the doctor in October and still had antibodies, so he felt safe. But in December, it was surging. I think it was the Omicron variant in New York and Connecticut. So we typically had our family Christmas with my 3 siblings my dad, my stepmom, and our significant others like the week of Christmas. And then some of us go over to my dad's for Christmas Eve. So December 19th, we all went up to my dad's house and we actually had a reservation for lunch. And I remember being a little bit concerned because that week, you just heard the cases were skyrocketing. I was actually going to call and ask, like, should we be doing this? But they also had doubts, which I learned later on. Maybe we shouldn't be going out to lunch, but we went and we had like a great time. Our table wasn't really near anyone, so none of us really thought anything of it. And we spent the day at his house all together, playing games. It was a great day. And when we left on the night of the 19th, gave him a big hug, thought I'd be seeing him on the 24th. Didn't think anything of it. And then on the 23rd, my dad and my stepmom told us, we're not feeling well. We both have a fever, body aches, it could be COVID. So my siblings and I tested. All of us were negative except my youngest brother, who was 18 at the time, lived with my dad and my stepmom. So all three of them came down with what they thought was COVID. They did the at-home test. My dad tested negative. My stepmom and brother were positive. But my dad had a really high fever, body aches, kind of what he would get when he had the flu. Yeah. So we assumed, okay, he's also COVID positive. No one should be coming over for Christmas Eve. And it was the first Christmas Eve I hadn't spent with my dad in 29 years. So it was definitely strange. I was at my mom's house and just checking in, his fever had come down a bit. He was feeling sick, but not terrible. And then finally on the 24th, he tested again and was positive. So him, my stepmom, and my brother were just quarantining in their house, resting, fluids, the whole thing. And on Sunday, which was the 26th, my dad was feeling a bit better. His fevers were lower. He was still like not feeling great, but was in the office doing bills, talking about work, was excited to getting back to work, hopefully the following Thursday. So things started seeming like to go in the right direction. So I wasn't really worried about him. I was like, he's 60, he's vaccinated, he's strong, like he has no underlying conditions. Never in a million years did I think that it would take a turn. So that Sunday, he got a full body rash. And when my dad would get a fever, that's typically what would happen. So when he had the flu 2 years prior, got a full body rash, he was on and off steroids like that year. For some reason, if he'd work in the yard, he'd get a rash. So he would be on steroids, off steroids. We didn't really understand like why this was becoming more and more of a thing. So looking back, I always wonder, was there something going on in his body that we didn't know about?
Yeah.
So Monday and Tuesday of that week, 27th, 28th, were kind of the same. He still wasn't feeling great. Fever was barely there. And he didn't have a pulse oximeter. I kick myself, thinking back that, why didn't I get him one? But he wasn't coughing. He had no signs of it being in his chest. So honestly, we didn't think anything of it. My stepmom and my brother started feeling a bit better. And then on Wednesday of that week, my dad was just really tired. All of a sudden, it seemed like it came back and hit him hard again. So my stepmom was calling the doctor. He was on the steroids for his rash since Monday. They were trying to figure out, okay, now why is he 5 days later not feeling a bit better?
Yeah.
So they started him on, I think, electrolytes, trying to see if he was dehydrated. And he was just on the couch again Wednesday. It was almost like it was Christmas Eve all over again with symptoms. And on the 30th, I guess he was just sleeping the whole day. So now it's Thursday. He's even more tired. His fevers are back. And it just seemed like it was going the wrong way. I mean, I spoke to him that day on the phone. I he seemed fine. He's like, it's really taken it out of us. I'm still on the couch, but the narrative was like, I'm okay. And we had actually talked about, I bought him a gift to see a Broadway show in the city on January 9th. And that day he's like, you know what? I think that we should push that back. I don't think I'm going to be feeling up for it. And that's when I was like, oh, that's interesting. I really thought, okay, things were on the up and up. So I guess on Thursday night of the 30th, he got up off the couch. My stepmom said, you know what? How about you go take a shower, a hot shower? That will feel good. Let's try to see what we can do here. And so he took a shower and was walking back, I think, from the bathroom, which is like 10 feet. And all of a sudden was just out of breath. So my stepmom's like, hold on. Are you having trouble breathing? He's like, no, I was walking and now I'm really out of breath. And so alarm bells started going off on her head, like, okay, this is of concern now. I think we need to do something. So my dad was always a bit afraid of the hospital. He went to the doctor, but never wanted to be in the hospital, as most people don't. So she brought up the idea of bringing him that night. And he was like, nope, no way. They were going back and forth. Just let me go to sleep and we'll see how I feel tomorrow. And if not, fine. I'll go if you want me to.
Yeah.
So he went to sleep, woke up on the 31st at about 6 a.m. Same thing happened. He walked to the bathroom, was so out of breath. And my stepmom was like, okay, that's it. I gave you the night. We need to do something. So they called his primary doctor, who was like a good family friend. And now it's New Year's Eve. So they were trying to get him in. He was like, okay, bring him in. Let's do a chest x-ray and just see. So this was about at 6 a.m. And by 10 a.m., they couldn't find an appointment for him. They couldn't get him in. It's New Year's Eve. Not many people are working. So my stepmom's speaking with the doctor and she's like, I think something's really wrong. And he was like, you know what? Bring him to Stanford Hospital. Bring him to the ER. That's the only way we're going to get him in today. So we didn't know at the time, but so my stepmom gets him in the car, brings him to Stanford Hospital, I would say around noon. He walks into the ER. In his mind, it was like, okay, I need to get medicine or something's not right. But my dad was not thinking he was going to be admitted.
Yeah.
So I guess he walks into the emergency room. And at this point, they had changed the protocol in Connecticut since cases were surging about a week prior that no one's allowed in with you, no visitors. So my stepmom, they see him in the emergency room. They take him back and his oxygen's a 76. So
wow.
Immediately they're like, okay, you're being admitted. This is serious. They get him on IVs. They're doing all these tests. They don't let my stepmom in. And she kind of fought her way in, which I'm very happy about because my dad always just was a little bit anxious in these situations with doctors. And now they're telling him he's going to be admitted to the hospital. So they started running, I think they did an x-ray. They had him on high flow oxygen. And then with the high flow oxygen, they were able to get him up to a high 90 saturation. So that was promising, like, okay, maybe he just needs some oxygen. He needs to be admitted and, we'll take it from there. So that Friday, New Year's Eve, my stepmom leaves. We're all made aware that my dad is now admitted to the hospital. And, none of us can believe it. Like, dad was doing better. Like, what happened? I feel like my dad is he always was really strong and you would never know. Like, he would never want anyone to think anything was wrong. So I feel like he knew something wasn't right, but was kind of trying to power through. But I'm very thankful that my stepmom made him go to the hospital because they kind of said if he kept going at that rate, if your oxygen continues to drop, like, you can go into do serious damage to your organs. So that day we were upset, but we were like, oh, thank God you brought him, like, this is what he needs. He's going to get better. And he was texting in our family group chat that night and the next morning, like, Happy New Year. I love you guys so much. You're my everything. That's always how he was. And then on the morning of the 1st, he was in a step down unit from the ICU. And he sent us a text. I'll never forget it. He's like, 2021 tried to take one last shot at me. I knew this was going the wrong way a few days ago, which he never let on to. But we caught it, and now I'm fighting like hell. Like, I'm going to beat this. And we were like, oh, thank God, Dad. Like, you got it. We're here for you. And what was scary was he was alone. We weren't allowed in. So now he's in the hospital alone on high flow oxygen in his nose and the rebreather mask. And that's kind of how we entered the new year.
Yeah. So, and I know he was in the hospital until he passed away on January 19th. So, what was the progression? Did he get better and then worse, or did things just steadily go downhill? And then also, like, did you hear from the hospital regularly, and were you able to like FaceTime or video call with him or keep in touch with him somehow?
Yeah, so when he got there on Saturday, things seemed to be improving, like oxygen still in the high 90s. He was on the highest flow, though, through his nose and the rebreather. So they're like, if any, they did preface it, like, if his oxygen levels start to drop, the next step is intubation because he is on the highest level. So that was one of our biggest fears in the beginning. He had a tough night, Saturday night, the 1st. We woke up on the 2nd and had texts, or my stepmom had called me because the doctor had called her. Sunday morning, they almost intubated him. I don't know what happened or why, but I guess his oxygen was dropping. And somehow they got him in a position where his oxygen level was at a good rate and they didn't have to intubate. So that kind of scared us all on Sunday, the 2nd, thinking, okay, now Dad was stable the day before. What's happening now?
Mm-hmm.
So the whole time he was from January 1st to January 12th, he was pretty much prone the entire time. So he's laying on his stomach face down with the high flow oxygen and the rebreather mask. So I can only imagine how uncomfortable that was. But pretty much every day, the nurse or the doctor would call my stepmom, and the first few days they would just call her, and then she would like disseminate the information to all of us. And then after a few days, I asked like if you could just, include me in those conversations, like 3-way me in, so I can just take notes. Like it's better to have 2 of us on the line just hearing exactly what's going on, because they only give you like 5 minutes of their time because they're so busy. So just getting those updates once a day, we were always like waiting for them. And I was lucky enough, my boyfriend at the time, now fiance's mom, is a nurse in Atlanta. So I'd say a few days in, I started reading her all of the notes after the calls. And then we got to the point where we 4-wayed her in because they're kind of throwing numbers at us and what's going on. And we just kind of needed that nurse perspective that will be honest with us. Like, okay, I'm Googling it. This seems good. This seems like an improvement, but like, where are we actually? Because it was often hard to know.
Yeah.
When he was in the hospital, when he would talk, he would desaturate a bit. So I was personally like afraid to call him. My stepmom probably spoke to him 4 times a day, and would update us. And on Tuesday, I guess it was the 4th, they came to us and said, there's a clinical study that your dad would be a good fit for. He's on day 5 of oxygen. We have to decide today if we want to put him in this study. So we got all of the information. It was like 30 pages. My stepmom read it, his primary doctor, I read it, my mom, who's in pharmaceuticals, read through it. We had my fiance's mom read it as a nurse, just to make sure we were making the right decision. And still to this day, I don't know if it was the right decision. So we put him in this clinical trial that was 5 days, starting Wednesday the 5th, and it would run through that Sunday. And basically, it put him on remdesivir, which he was not administered when he got to the hospital because he was on day 8 of symptoms, and they said he was too sick and out of the window. And then it put him on cyclosporine, which is like an anti-inflammatory, which they thought would be helpful because his lungs were so inflamed that's why he was having a hard time breathing or absorbing the oxygen. So when he first went in, also they thought he had pneumonia on top, or basically COVID pneumonia, which I didn't even know was something. So they had him on a whole list of 15 different medicines. And so that Tuesday we decided, okay, he's been on high oxygen for 4 days. Nothing has changed. He's still in the prone position. Let's just try it. And they said at any point we could stop because some of the risks were, I think, kidney damage and liver damage. But they said if any of his levels go up, we could stop it, no problem. So my dad was really nervous about it. We talked to him and said, Dad, this seems like the best option. Let's try it. You can quit at any time. It's a medicine. Let's give it a go.
Yeah.
So he signed off, started the medical trial that Wednesday. And Wednesday night was the first time I got to speak to him alone on the phone. And I had spoken to the doctors. I had spoken to my stepmom. I knew what was going on. But when I heard him on the high flow oxygen and the rebreather on the phone, I didn't want to get upset because the whole time I was just trying to be like level-headed, like we're going to figure this out. Let's just focus on the solution and we'll get Dad there. I always regret this. I just like broke down on the phone because he sounded like I was in like a wind tunnel. He was like trying to yell to speak. And we probably spoke for about 2 minutes because I didn't want him to desaturate. It's my biggest concern. And he was always so sweet. He just said, I love you so much. You kids changed my life. You know how much I love you. I was like, I love you, Dad. Like, you just got to keep fighting. You can do it. And never in a million years was my dad scared. I never heard my dad cry. And this conversation like haunts me. He just said, baby, I don't want to die. Please, I don't want to die. I was like, Dad, you're not going to die. You got to listen to me. You can't. He was so positive all the time and he had gratitude journals. I was like, you got to stay positive. You got to picture yourself coming out of there because we need you. So you're going to have to fight. He's like, I know, I'm trying. I just really don't want to die. I was like, no, Dad, I promise you, you're not going to die. And that was our conversation. And it always just kind of stays in my mind because I promised him, I thought he really could make it. So after speaking to him, I felt like it was important to one phone call a day, like to have all of our siblings talk to him, just because it was getting more and more scary. He's going on day 6 in the hospital. So I actually got to speak to him that Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday of that week. And then he was still pretty stable. High flow oxygen wasn't going down. He was still prone. He was talking about how hungry he was. He just kept saying, I would love chicken cutlets when I come home. That's all I'm thinking of. We were like, okay, keep picturing the chicken cutlets. We're going to get you out of there. And then that Saturday, it was the 8th. My younger brother, who was 24 at the time, spoke to him and they had like a great conversation. My dad was like laughing and joking. with my brother, and he was like, oh, Dad sounded great. We spoke for like 10 minutes. We were like, okay, that's awesome news. That was Saturday the 8th. And then my sister got to speak to him on the 9th. And on the 9th, we were speaking to the doctors and said, he hasn't moved in 10 days. Is there any way we could get someone from PT in there just to move his legs or his arms? Like, he was such an active person. He always made sure his steps, he made sure he had 10,000 steps a day, oftentimes much more. So we felt it was important just to get him moving and get him focused on staying strong. So they went in there and gave him little exercises like, gas pedal and things like that. And he was so excited. He texted us, oh, I feel so good. I'm starting my exercises today. I just did 100 gas pedals. Like he was feeling like really positive. And that was the last day of the trial, that Sunday. We were like, okay, this is great news. You're feeling strong. You're moving more. You've been stable. This is all really good news. So on Monday the 10th, my youngest brother got to speak to him, and all of the news from the doctor was positive. Like, okay, we might be getting over the hump. We're going in the right direction. All of his other organs are stable. They were constantly doing x-rays of his lungs, and he had a lot of I think they called it like opaqueness. Basically, you could just see like all the COVID pneumonia. And while his left side started to get worse while he was in the hospital, his right side started clearing up. So it was kind of like we were having good news. We were holding on to that. Like, well, one side's getting better. He must be going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So Monday on the 10th, we had sent him like teddy bears to the hospital. That made his day. He was telling the nurses how, about his family, and he was good. And so Monday, things were finally like a glimmer of hope. I think they actually got him up to go to the bathroom for the first time. So he was out of bed for the first time in 11 days. We're like, okay, this is really good news. And then and they actually had him on his back, I think, for like 2 hours that Monday, which was huge. And he was really excited about that because he's like, I've been laying face down for 10 days. Like, I'm in so much pain. And he wasn't desaturating, or he was, but he's still in the 90s. So it was still positive. And then on Tuesday, the 11th, they had a hard time with his IVs, and he had been poked and prodded for 12, 13 days. And they were having a hard time putting in like his new medicine. And so they called us and said, he has blood clots in his arms now. We can't use the lines that we have. The medicine's not going in. We can't draw blood. And so that was like the first item, I think, of concern. They did ultrasounds of his arms, and they're like, yeah, he has blood clots. We'll put him on medicine, but just so you know, that's what's happening. So they put in a central line in his neck. They called us for approval, and my dad was really nervous about it, but we decided as a family, like, that makes sense. We need him to get medicine, and like, clearly his arms are unwell. So we approved that. And on Tuesday, he was up, he was going to the bathroom. He sat in a chair for 2 hours, which was remarkable for us. Still on high flow, but he was off his back and in a chair. He then spent the night of the 11th on his back for about 3 or 4 hours, which was also good news. And then the morning of the 12th, they called us and said, he made it through most of the night and not in a prone position. The doctor, one of the nurses called us and said, okay, it's time we start to talk about home care because, he's getting over the hump. He's most likely going to come home. It probably won't be for 7 to 10 days, but that's where we're headed. So let's discuss what those options are. So we were so excited. My stepmom was looking into, could we get someone to come to the house for his PT? He would really rather be home than in like a step down facility. So she starts making arrangements for that. I told her, if she has to go into work, I will just work from home for the next few weeks at my dad's house, and the PT can come in, but at least he has someone there with him. So we start making all these plans. Everyone's so excited. We're like, Dad's going to be home in a week. We did it. Thank God. And I still question their decision at the hospital. I have all of the medical records, which is hundreds of pages, and I've read through them. I've read through them back in February, and then I revisited them this week just to make sure I got the details correct, because sometimes it feels like a blur.
Yeah.
And on the 12th, I guess at 3:00, he had to go to the bathroom. So he went to the bathroom and desaturated like he typically did. And a nurse happened to be in there at the time, and his oxygen was dropping to about 80. And she said, I need to call the pulmonologist. I think we have to intubate. And my dad's biggest fear was intubation. So he's like, no, what? And I still question, like, he always desaturated when he was up and moving. So the fact that they made this decision on day 12, when they're talking about getting him home in a week, at 3:00, he went to the bathroom, was starting to desaturate. By 3:10, they called my stepmom and said, we're intubating your husband. He's signing off on it now. And she was like, what? I mean, 2 hours ago, we were talking about sending him home. And what bothers me is they didn't give us a choice. They weren't like, we think we need to intubate your husband. Do we have your approval? It was, okay, things have changed. We're intubating him now. So I think if they had given him maybe a half hour, got him on his side, would he have gotten back to the 90s? I truly believe that. But for some reason, this nurse decided, okay, we have to call a pulmonologist. The pulmonologist was there in 5 minutes. He said, okay, intubation is happening now. So my stepmom was like, I have to speak to him. Just let me speak to him really quick. So she's talking to him, and the last thing he says to her as well is like, please, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I want to come home. Tell me it's going to be okay. I'm not going to die. She's like, no, you're not, Aunt. I'm so sorry. But maybe you need, we were all like, maybe you need this. I don't know. He was intubated at 3:15. So desaturated at 3. They called in the pulmonologist. He made the decision to intubate. They put him under and intubated him so fast.
Wow.
So none of us, and I listened to some of your other podcasts, and other people had the option to put it off. We were not given that option. The doctor just came in headstrong and said, this is what we're doing, which I deeply regret. I wish they had asked us, and we could have said, give him some time. He walked in at a 76. He was walking around the house at a 76. So the fact that he was down to an 80 and you made this decision, I don't agree with, but I'm not a doctor. So at 3:15, he was intubated, and we were all kind of crushed about it. Just the knee jerk from your dad will be home in 7 to 10 days to now he's in a medically induced coma on a ventilator. Just felt like the rug had been ripped out from under us. So after that, he was transferred from the step-down unit of the ICU to the ICU. And that night, we all FaceTimed him. He was in a prone position, in a coma. And we're all just talking to him, trying to stay positive, hoping he could hear us. Like, it's going to be okay, Dad. Maybe this is the rest you needed. You were fighting so hard. And so he was on the ventilator from the 12th, the 13th, pretty stable. They didn't really change anything. And then our focus was, okay, let's start to get these vent settings down. You hear of stories. It's like a ticking time clock once you're on. Yeah. So every time we talk to the doctor, it's like, okay, what are his levels? What are his settings? How can we get this down? And my fiance's mom was on all of the calls. She was so sweet. just trying to talk to the doctors and understanding where we truly were. So on the 13th, we all like FaceTimed him at separate times. I talked to him with my stepmom and my sister for like an hour, just playing him songs and trying to keep it happy, you know. And so we spoke to him the 13th, the 14th. The 14th, they were able to turn down the settings a bit without his oxygen dropping. So we were trying to stay positive. Okay, you know, maybe we can get him off this ventilator in a week. Maybe his lungs needed rest. The 15th was a similar story. Things were still positive. The settings were going down. We all still were FaceTiming him all throughout the day. My stepmom was like staying on FaceTime pretty much all day, like reading him affirmations. We were playing him songs. And then they started, when you start to wean someone off a ventilator, you have to start to decrease their sedation so that they start to breathe on their own. And I also still don't fully understand why it was done this way. But over FaceTime, my stepmom starts to see his face thrashing back and forth. He's like thrashing in the bed. He's starting to wake up alone. And he doesn't know what's going on. He has the ventilator and is probably terrified. And so she's calling the nurses station multiple times. Like, you got to get in there. My husband's waking up. You have to get in there. And, you know, finally they get in there. They like increase the sedation a bit. Try, you know, never speak to him. I don't think, like, Anthony, I think if someone was there, like one of us, to be like, Dad, you're waking up. You're in Sanford Hospital. You're on a ventilator. Maybe he wouldn't be so scared waking up like that. But he was thrashing. We don't know if that caused the tube to move and not be in a correct place. But after that happened, on the 16th, things just started to turn. I think they took his blood and his white count was elevated. They believed he had now bacterial pneumonia. They were believing he might be in like early stages of sepsis. So all of a sudden it was great news, 14th, 15th. Now the 16th, they're calling us that it's grim. It doesn't look good. And also something else we've later found out in the medical records is he had to be re-intubated twice because it had moved, I guess, the day he was intubated. So I don't know if that caused it when he woke up alone and he was like thrashing around and was like halfway down the bed by the time they got in there, that it moved then. But something happened and bacteria entered his lungs and then his bloodstream. So on the 16th, the night of the 16th, the conversations got a little bit more, this is not good. This is looking pretty bad. And so obviously they are asking us, do we want to resuscitate? Do we want to continue care? We're like 100%. My dad wanted to be resuscitated. He would have fought till the end. So we said, we do everything we can. Like, we're going to keep fighting until, God forbid, his body gives out. So that was our plan. And then the morning of the 17th, they called, I think at about 5 a.m. And we hadn't seen him, in 18 days. And they said, it's time to come and say your goodbyes because he's not going to make it. So they called my stepmom. She drove down. It was like kind of like an ice storm. So she was trying to get down to Sanford Hospital. My mom had called me and I was sleeping, and I'll never forget her call. But she's like, baby, it's time. Like, you got to go in to see Dad. They don't think he's going to make it. And I just remember like that gut punch feeling of like, I just don't understand how we got here. So we all go to the hospital that Monday. And this one, we're going in, I think 2 at a time to spend time with him and just talk to him and be there. And one of the doctors, and I think this is who intubated him, is like, it's not looking good. he's not going to make it. He's just going to continue to decline. He's in pain. You know, this isn't going to turn around. And it was just super super negative, and we were all like on the camp like, dad fights like hell. We're gonna fight like hell until he calls it. So we were very like, no, I understand what you're saying. And he just kept coming back to like, death is imminent, like it's gonna happen. We're like, okay, well, you need to do everything for him you can. So I wish we had done this earlier, but then we started looking into transferring him out of the hospital to a hospital in New York City. And because the hospital he was at did not have ECMO, and we were looking like, oh, maybe ECMO is the answer. We probably should have, I looking back, I want to kick myself because I'm like, we should have done this probably 5 days sooner, and maybe then he would have had a chance. So the night of the 17th, we leave the hospital around, I think like 7 or 8 p.m. And they're saying he's declining, but he's still stable. His oxygen was stable. He was on the max vent setting, but they were giving him antibiotics for now this bacterial pneumonia. So we left the hospital. We all went to dinner. And we're like, we're just gonna like pray, and if anyone can turn it around, it's him. So my stepmom had been FaceTiming him like throughout the night, every night, just to see him and make sure he was okay. And so it was the night of the 17th where she'd been up every night for 17 nights, just making sure he was good. So I was like, I'll take tonight. So every 2 hours, I would just FaceTime him, whether it was for like 10, 15 minutes, check on his oxygen levels because we could see them through the FaceTime, and just talk to him for like 10, 15 minutes. So we did that like every hour between like 11 p.m. and 9 a.m. and just make sure things were stable. And they were. So that Tuesday, we all were at our separate houses, like FaceTiming him throughout the day, talking to him. And then at about 6 p.m., we got the call that now his kidneys were failing. So they kind of said, this is what we were always kind of up against, secondary organ failure, and now it's here. So I don't know if it was from the clinical trial and was just late, or it just got his sepsis now took over. I'll never really know. So we all were on like a family call, and decided put him on dialysis. And they said to us, you know, he could die during the procedure. And we're like, well, it's the best chance we have, like put him on. So we're all like holding our breath. They're like, we'll call you back in 30 minutes once dialysis has been started. So they call us back. They're like, it was successful. Just so you know, this is just prolonging his life. Like this isn't going to change anything, which they kept stressing to us. But we said, that's okay. You know, we're going to keep dealing with every problem as they come. So he was put on dialysis around 7 p.m. And then we all reconvened at my sister's house that night, probably around 8. And we all started calling all these hospitals because the doctor had said he called around for ECMO, but we weren't really sure. So we were calling all these hospitals. They're like, no, the doctor needs to call. So like all 6 of us were on the phone in different rooms calling every hospital in like the tri-state area with the ECMO machine. And the problem was now he's in a secondary organ failure. It's too late. No one's going to accept him. And the fact that he's 60, sometimes that, like I think one of the hospitals, their cutoff was like 58. So they didn't want to take him. And then finally we kind of just like all looked at each other at like 10:30. We're like, what are we doing? Like we should be FaceTiming dad. Like we need to be spending time with him. Like I don't think we're going to find a hospital that's going to listen to us to take him. So we were just FaceTiming him and talking to him. And then at 11 p.m. we got the call. You guys have to come in and say goodbye. Like it's happening. It's going to be happening now. So we all drove to the hospital, and I'll always remember that ride. It was just like no one's speaking. Everyone's just like in shock. going to say goodbye. So we got there and they said, so it was my stepmom, my two brothers, my sister, myself, my boyfriend, and my brother's girlfriend, who were like family. So we got there and they're like, only 3 people allowed in at a time. We're like, well, he has a wife and 4 kids, so we're all going to be with him when he passes. Yeah. So we all got up there and they only allowed 3 at a time. So they only wanted 3, but my stepmom, my 2 brothers, myself, and my sister all went in. Our boyfriend and girlfriend waited in the waiting room. And we were there with my dad for probably 2 hours, just like all talking to him, holding his hand, telling him to keep fighting. His levels were declining, but very slowly. So now we're probably 2 hours in, just to kind of watching him pass. And my mom had gotten there too. And she was in the waiting room. And she was like, I need to come say goodbye. You got to let me in. I was like, okay. So my youngest brother and my sister left. And so my mom, my boyfriend, and then my brother's girlfriend could come in to say their goodbyes. So we were just in there, talking to him. The nurse had put on Frank Sinatra radio for him. He loved it. And we're just really staring at the screen, watching his heart rate go slowly, his oxygen. And when my mom got in there, they had been divorced like 27 years. But she started talking to him and she was so upset. And like, I'll always remember her talking to him. And she's like, I'm just so mad at you. Like, you can't leave these kids. Like, you just can't. And as she was talking, like, his heart rate started going up. His oxygen started dropping. I'm like, oh my God, Mom, he can hear you. Like, be careful. Yeah. Like, you can't. We need him to hold on as long as possible. So once his heart rate started dropping, I texted my sister. I'm like, you and Matthew, our brother, need to get in here. I think it's actually going to happen now. So this is probably at 2 a.m. They run in. So now we have like 9 people in the room. And the nurse was really sweet. He was so great. Good. He's like, you know what? You guys just stay. I won't say anything. Just stay. Like, what are we fighting here to keep having you guys round robin? So we all just sat and held his hand and watched him pass from like 11 p.m. until 9 a.m. And we all got to say our goodbyes and just tell him how much we loved him, how good of a dad he was, how he changed our lives. And at 9:02 a.m., he was pronounced dead, and they came in a little bit before and said, do you want to resuscitate? I need you to understand what that looks like, because they said, we're going to come in here. We're going to, sorry to be graphic, but we're going to crack his ribs. You're going to bring him back to this terrible state of life. And he's coming back to this state of life. It's not like he's going to come back and we're going to magically fix him. He's in multiple organ failure. It's not right. So we all kind of talked and said, I know Dad originally had wanted that, but now we're in such a bad situation where, okay, like it's time to let him go peacefully. So we just did that and we all talked to him. And I think it was when my stepmom said her goodbyes right before he passed. He just had one tear coming down. So we're like, we know you don't want to go. And we know you can hear us. So as terrible as it was, we weren't there with him for the 20 days. I'm so thankful that we had like those 10 hours, as terrible as they were, just to be with him and he wasn't alone and just tell him how much we loved him. So in that respect, we were lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, I've said it a few times on the show. It's interesting how we quantify luck.
Yeah.
In this particular situation. Yeah. So, did you have a funeral for your dad?
We did. So it was January 2022. Cases were still kind of surging since December. But we had a funeral, and honestly, we didn't even know where to begin when we left the hospital that day. Like, none of us thought this was going to happen. My dad never talked about wishes. My dad didn't have a will. So we were all kind of confused on how to even do this. So we went to a funeral home in Mamaroneck where he had lived for a few years. That's where his dad's funeral was. So we started there, and then we went to a church in Rye, which is where he had married my mom, and we talked to them about their funeral or procession. And basically Monday, the 24th, we had a wake for him at the funeral home. Everyone had to wear masks. They were strict on that. We were strict on that. But there was like hundreds of people there. It was packed because my dad loved everyone and everyone loved my dad. He was in the car business for 40 years. So many friends, cousins, extended family that the entire time it was just a revolving door. And I'm happy we got to do that for him, because that's just who he was. And we were able to have the funeral for him the next day. And the funeral was kind of surreal. I oftentimes feel like I don't remember it, but I delivered the eulogy with my two brothers. And yeah, we put him to rest in Connecticut. And we actually had a luncheon at one of his favorite restaurants. They don't let you rent it out, but they knew him and loved him, and kind of let us have the space, which was nice. So we were able to celebrate him, I think, the way he would have wanted.
Yeah, he was 60 years old, so it's not something I think a lot of 60-year-old people think about or talk about or have planned ahead of time.
No, definitely not. And he thought he was gonna live forever. I mean, his dad passed in his late 80s. His mom's still alive. She's 95. Like, it was never even a consideration.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to ask a question, and I don't know if you have looked into or read about or connected with other people in the COVID community who feel like that after their loved one passed and they had no funeral or memorial, that they felt this isolation and disconnect. And then you were able to have one. I guess my question is, did you feel or do you feel a sense of closure from that? Or do you still have that feeling of like, my dad died of COVID, and so there's that isolation or grief difference in how he passed away?
I still feel the disconnect. I'm a part of like a few different COVID groups on Facebook. I had did a COVID support group that it's basically those that lost loved ones to COVID, because I feel like it's such a different kind of death. First of all, you have like the political overlay that some people think it's not real, and then you also aren't able to be there. Like, just if we were there with my dad for the 20 days and holding his hand and like helping him fight, I think it would have been different. But it just went from a healthy man full of life to him passing away in 30 days. And I don't think any of us can still wrap our heads around it. Like, it just feels like a dream of like a nightmare that you want to wake up from. It just, I don't think there's closure when it's this kind of passing.
Yeah, I wanted your take on it just because of the time difference between the early COVID and that first wave and what you have experienced in January of this year. Yeah. So I guess, have you given any thought, since you are a part of COVID groups? Like, this is you're in the middle of your first year. You're coming up on the holidays and Christmas, which were important to your family. And then you're going to be going into that, and you are very knowledgeable about the day to day with your dad and everything that happened. You're going to be going into those days that come up to the 1 year anniversary of the day he passed away. Have you given any thought to that? And are you preparing like something to do for yourself for healing, or I mean, do you have any sense of how that's going to be?
No, I think it's going to be really difficult just because my dad loved the holidays so much, and then our last day together as a family was our Christmas celebration, and then we couldn't see him on Christmas Eve, and then after that was just the decline. Um, so I know we're all very like nervous kind of going into the holidays. I I think we just have to think through like what we can do that's positive, or how we could spend the day together and do something in memory of my dad. Um, I feel like we're all kind of frozen right now. We know Thanksgiving is coming up, and we don't really know um, what we can do to make it less hard. I don't even know if that's possible, but
Yeah.
it's definitely something that we need to kind of think of.
Yeah. Yeah. I relived, I didn't want to, but I think my body and my brain relived the days. And here's when I got the news of this, and my mom tested positive and was moved to, all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. They say time heals, and I think that's crap.
Yeah.
I really do. I think no matter how many years you go through it, I think you're always going to think of your dad, especially at the holidays. It sounds like you guys had quite a group and a family and a closeness, and these traditions that you followed.
Yeah. And he was such a big presence. He was always like the life of the party, and so funny. So it's just gonna feel even greater because he was such a big life.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to ask couple more questions. First, what was your dad's name?
Anthony Granchelli.
I feel that it helps in a way to say their names out loud, because most of the time, like, I call my mom, you call your dad, but
Yeah.
to like name them makes a difference. What do you miss most about your dad?
Oh. He was the most loving father I had ever seen. Like, he would just call and text all of us. I would say like every day or every week, and would just say like the most sweet messages, like to us, like, I love you so much. You don't know how proud I am of you guys. You guys changed my life. He was just so loving, and I have never seen anyone else that loving. I'm gonna miss his hugs. His support. He was so supportive of anything we did. It was never what he wanted us to do. He was like, "You're gonna go out there and just crush it. I know you all will." That's how he was. I miss his positivity. He was, no matter what life gave him, and it gave him a lot of ups and downs. But he was a really positive person, and he always used to call me Big Head, and always like grab my head and just say, "Oh, I love you." Like I miss that a lot.
Yeah. Oh, that's, yeah. Those things are important. I hope that, well, I know you'll keep thinking about that, and I can tell when I heard what you said that you smiled a little bit at that, and I hope that stays with you like that, in that sort of happy, like, connected way with your dad. I'm sure he's out there watching over you.
Yeah, I think he is. I like to think so.
Yeah. Have you had anyone ask about his, like, callously ask about pre-existing conditions or his vaccination status or anything like that in your talking about him to people?
Yes, definitely. I think they automatically assume he wasn't vaccinated, which he was. I actually had someone at the wake ask me that.
Oh.
And I was like, yeah, no, he was vaccinated. He wasn't boosted yet, but that was when boosters just came out, and he actually had an appointment for January 6th. So that was something. And then people just are like, well, your dad probably had pre-existing conditions, or there must have been something else going on. It's kind of always the response I feel like I get. I don't think anyone wants to believe that you can be 60 years old, healthy, and vaccinated and go through what he went through.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings me to my last question, which is, what do you say to people who tell you that COVID isn't real?
Oh, that one. Yeah, that's tough. I in the beginning, I do regret, like, I would just kind of brush it off and ignore that comment, because I felt like if I went back, it wasn't going to be a very nice and calm response. But I would just, what I now say is like, it very much is. I think that you are fortunate enough, it sounds silly, to be able to believe that because you have not been directly affected by it. But what I want to do is show them, like, this is what COVID looks like. I have a picture of my dad, December 19th, a video of him playing categories and laughing and having the best time. And then I have a picture of him on a ventilator on January 19th when we're saying goodbye to him. And just say, look, this is COVID. This is what it did to this lively person in 30 days. So for you not to believe it is just wild to me. So I just try to calmly say, like, well, it is very real, and you're lucky enough not to feel the need to believe it because you're not affected by it. But I mean, 1 million people have died, I think, in the US alone, right? So if you just think about the multiples of their families that are affected, it is very real.
Yeah, I don't look at the numbers very often. In the beginning, I think I looked at them a lot because when my mom was alive in the memory care, I was like, I need to know if this is getting better or worse.
Yeah.
And then after that, I just stopped. So I know it is over 1 million, but I don't know how far over. And honestly, I don't look at the world. It's too much.
Yeah, I agree. I think in one of my COVID groups, they had said that, if we're at 1 million deaths, think about how many times that by 10, because that's probably how many people are affected. And that always stuck with me, because of all the people they loved. Think about kind of where they're left now.
Yeah. Yeah. And in your case, there's so many people that loved your dad and came to his memorial service. I mean, times him alone times 200, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm happy I got to tell his story. I've found that recently that's kind of the only way I can channel my feelings about it in a productive way, because I feel like we just have to keep talking about those that passed and those that passed from COVID, because he was such a big, fun, loving presence that changed so many people's lives, that I don't want anyone to ever forget about him, because I'm going to be telling his story as long as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. They need to be named, and they were people, and they have families left behind that love them, and losing them in such huge numbers as far as that goes, then it's easier to not humanize them. And this is hard. I mean, telling your story and going through all those medical records and everything, it's difficult, but like for you channeling your grieving and healing, this is, how I do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lauren, for telling your dad's story and sharing so much with me today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast @gmail.com. This show won't ever have a members area or episodes that you have to pay to listen to, but there are expenses to hosting a podcast, and if you'd like to help, you can support this show at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is in the show notes below. And if you're still listening, and thank you so much if you are, if you like this episode, please share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, please rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this podcast finds new listeners. So please share the show. Until next time.